Chapter 1 Security and Survival. An art historian turns to me at a party. Quote, "You're writing a book on population control? My field is aesthetics, and I feel that overpopulation is destroying the beauty of great cities like Paris. Ugly immigrants' housing is springing up all over the place." The babysitter turns off the TV. Quote, "I've been thinking about it," he says. I'd. Oh, sorry, there's something on my screen. If they don't force people to be sterilized in India, how are they going to cope with the population explosion? An accounting professor explains how pharmaceutical companies could develop cures for many of the basic diseases that afflict poor people, but don't because the people who need them are too poor to pay. Quote, "Maybe it's not so much a bad thing," he adds. "After all, if more poor people survive, it will only exacerbate the population problem." An economist known for his radical views on the United States economy surprises me by saying that many third world countries have no choice but to initiate harsh population control measures. Quote, "Their economic survival is at stake," he asserts. I have grown to expect such responses from people, no matter how well meaning or well educated they are. They are repeating a message they have read in the newspaper, heard in the classroom, and seen on television so many times that it has become conventional wisdom. It first captured the popular imagination in 1968 when Stanford University biologist Paul Ehrlich published his famous book, The Population Bomb. He warned that mankind was breeding itself into oblivion and endorsed stringent population control measures, including compulsion if necessary. Probably most readers of Reproductive Rights and Wrongs have the same impression that the population bomb is exploding out of control. It is the starting point of most discussions about population and, unfortunately, the end point as well. The myth of overpopulation is one of the most pervasive myths in Western society, so deeply ingrained in the culture that it profoundly shapes the culture's worldview. The myth is compelling because of its simplicity. More people equal fewer resources and more hunger, poverty, environmental degradation, and political instability. Thus, this equation helps explain away the troubling human suffering in that other world beyond the neat borders of affluence. By procreating, the poor create their own poverty. We are absolved of responsibility and freed from complexity. The population issue is complex. To put it into proper perspective requires exploring many realms of human experience and addressing different philosophical and ethical questions. It, it entails making connections between fields of thought that have become disconnected as a result of narrow academic specialization. It demands the sharpening of critical faculties, critical facilities, and clearing the mind of received orthodoxies. And above all, it involves transcending the alienation embodied in the very terms population bomb and population explosion. Such metaphors suggest destructive technological processes outside human control. But the population issue is about living people, not abstract statistics. The myth of overpopulation is destructive because it prevents constructive thinking and action on reproductive issues. Instead of clarifying our understanding of these issues, it obfuscates our vision and limits our ability to see the real problems and find workable solutions. Worst of all, it breeds racism and turns women's bodies into a political battlefield. It is a philosophy based on a fear, not understanding. Family matters. On the surface, fears of the population explosion are born out of basic demographic statistics. In the 20th century, the world has experienced an unprecedented increase in population. In 1900, the global population was 1.7 billion. In 1950, it reached 2.5 billion, and today, roughly 5.7 billion people inhabit the Earth. And now it's 8 billion, I believe. Three-quarters of them live in the so-called third world. The United Nations predicted the world population will reach 6 billion by the end of the century and will eventually stabilized at about 11.6 billion between 2150 and 2200. Though such long-term demographic projections are notoriously uh, imprecise. Initially, this rapid increase in population was due in part to some very positive factors. Advances in medicine, public health measures, and better nutrition meant that more people lived longer. However, in other cases, notably in Africa, it may have been a response to colonialism, as indigenous communities sought to reconstitute themselves after suffering high death rates from slavery, diseases introduced from Europe, and oppressive labor conditions. In many countries, colonialism also disrupted traditional methods of birth spacing. In most industrialized countries, the decline in mortality rates were eventually offset by declines in birth rates, so that population growth began to stabilize in what is called the demographic transition. Most industrialized countries have now reached the replacement level of fertility, and in some the population is actually declining. Today, the birth rates are also falling virtually every area of the third world. In fact, the rate of the world population growth has been slowing since the mid 1960s. Population growth rates are highest in sub Saharan Africa, about 2.9% in 1994, but are considerably less than that in Asia, 1.9%, and Latin America, 2.0%. It is also important to remember that despite higher rates of growth, Africa contains a relatively small share of the world's population. India will have more births in 1994 than all 50 sub-Saharan nations combined. The United Nations estimates that by 2045, most countries will have reached replacement level fertility. The reason population growth still seems to be exploding is that large proportion of the present population is composed of men and women of childbearing age. Half of the world's people are under the age of 25, bearing major catastrophes. An inevitable demographic momentum is built into our present numbers, but this should be a subject of rational planning, not public paranoia. The truth is that the population explosion is gradually fizzing out. Nevertheless, there is still considerable discrepancy between birth rates in the industrialized world and birth rates in many third world countries, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. Conventional wisdom has it that third world people continue to have so many children because they are ignorant and irrational. They exercise no control over their sexuality, breeding like rabbits, in quotes. This, quote, superiority complex, end quote, of many Westerners as well as some third world elites is one of the main uh, obstacles in the way of meaningful discussion of the population problem. It assumes that everyone lives in the same basic social environment and faces the same set of reproductive choices. Nothing is further from the truth. In many third world societies, having large families is an eminently rational strategy of survival. Children's labor is a vital part of the family economy in many peasant communities of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Children help in the fields, tend animals, fetch water and wood, and care for their young brothers and sisters, freeing their parents for other tasks. Quite early in life, children labor makes them an asset rather than a drain on family income. In Bangladesh, for example, boys produce more than they consume by the age of 10 or to 13. And by the age of 15, their total production has exceeded their cumulative lifestyle consumption. Girls, likewise, perform a number of valuable economic tasks, which include helping their mothers with cooking and the post-harvest processing of crops. In urban settings, children often earn income uh, as servants, messenger boys, etc., or else they stay home to care for younger children while their parents work. Um, Among the Yoruba community in Nigeria, demographer John Caldwell found that even urban professional families benefit from many children through sibling assistance chains. As one child completes education and takes a job, he or she helps younger brothers and sisters move up the educational and employment ladder, and the connections and the influence of the family spread. In recent years, however, urbanization has been associated with fertility decline, and the number of countries for both positive and negative reasons. For those with ample resources, living in an urban area can mean greater access to education, health, family planning services, and the kind of information and media that promote a smaller family norm. Since the debt crisis and economic recession of the 1980s, however, the quality of life of the urban poor has deteriorated in many countries. Higher unemployment or work in in insecure, low-wage occupations mean that poor people simply do not have enough financial resources to support a large family. Brazil has experienced such a distress-related fertility decline. The government's failure to institute agrarian reforms in rural areas forced people to flee the poverty of the countryside, only to face the harsh realities of urban slums. Security is another crucial reason to have many children. In many third world societies, the vast majority of the population has no access to insurance schemes, pension plans, or government social security. It is children who care for their parents in their old age. Without them, one's future is endangered. The help of grown children can also be crucial in surviving the periodic crisis. Illness, drought, floods, food shortages, land disputes, political upheavals, which unfortunately punctuate village life in most parts of the world. By contrast, parents in industrialized countries and their affluent counterparts among third world urban elites have much less to rely on children either for labor or old age security. The, eco- the economics of family size changes as income goes up until children become a financial burden instead of an asset. When children are in school, for example, they no longer serve as a source of labor. Instead, parents must pay their education as well as for their own needs, which costs far more in a high consumption society than in a peasant village. And there is often no guarantee that parents' investment will buy the future loyalty of grown children. Oh, sorry, of a grown child. Well, you can't expect to always be buddy buddy with your parents. Like there doesn't have to be any drama, but I don't think it's necessarily like a thing people do. As economist Nancy Falbray notes, quote, the gift of education, unlike a bequest, cannot be made contingent upon conformity to certain expectations. Once given, it can hardly be revoked. In industrialized societies, personal savings, pension plans, and government programs replace children as the basic form of social security. These social changes fundamentally alter the value of children, making it far more rational from an economic standpoint to limit family size. Fulbright also argues that as the value of children decreases, male heads of households are more willing to allow their wives to work outside the home, since the contribution of their wages to the family economy now exceeds the value of their household work. This further spurs fertility decline. Son preference can be another important motive for having large families. The subordination of women means that economically and socially, daughters are not valued as high as sons in many cultures, particularly in South Asia, China, and parts of the Middle East. Not only does daughters' domestic work have less prestige, but daughters typically provide fewer years of productive years to their parents, because in many societies, they marry and leave home to live with their in laws shortly after puberty. Son preference combined with high infant child mortality means that parents must have many children just to ensure that one or two sons survive. The computer simulation found that a computer simulation found in the 1960s an Indian couple had to bear an average of 6.3 children to be confident of having one son would survive to adulthood. Son preference can also lead to skewed sex ratios, so that there are more males than females in a given population. Although the birth boys outnumber girls by a ratio of about 105 to 100. This discrepancy soon disappears, all else being equal, because biologically girls have better survival rates beginning in the first months after birth. In China, much of South Asia and parts of uh, North Africa, however, discrimination against girls means that there continues to be fewer girls than boys and women than men in the population. Discrimination takes many forms, from more typical forms of unbenign neglect, such as giving girls less food and healthcare, to female infanticide and sex selective abortion. Obviously, that's more of a population control method, but I would say allowing somebody to be 10 and having their health decline on purpose is a little worse than aborting somebody. I'm sorry. Uh, Forcing a woman to have an abortion is the point that this is making. It's terrible. But like being that person who experiences to 10 years of life and you're being treated like shit because you're a girl, like just personally speaking, if you were that person, that would suck more than just not existing. Now, all right, that's not the point though. All right. According to one estimate, more than 100 million women are missing throughout the world as a result of such discrimination. The situation is particularly serious in North India and China. See Chapter 9 and 13. High infant and child mortality rates are major underlying causes of high birth rates. Each year in developing countries, more than 12 million children die before reaching their fifth birthday. The average infant mortality rate is more than 71 deaths per 1,000 live births in developing countries as a whole, and over 100 in sub-Saharan Africa. By comparison, it is only 14 in industrialized countries. In recent decades, there has been some progress in reducing infant and child mortality, but not nearly enough. High infant mortality means that parents cannot be sure that children will survive to contribute to the family economy and to take care of them in their old age. The poor, thus caught in the death trap, they have to keep producing children in order that some will survive. Most countries that have achieved a low birth rate have done so only after infant and child mortality has declined. High infant mortality is primarily caused by poor nutrition both of the mother and of the child. In situations of chronic scarcity, women often eat less or eat last and least, with a profound impact on infant health. Inequality. Nourished mothers typically give birth to underweight babies, and low birth weight has been identified as the greatest single hazard for infants, in increasing their vulnerability to developmental problems and their risk of death from common childhood illnesses. Severely undernourished women also give lower quality breast milk. For a woman to breastfeed successfully without damaging her health, she must increase her caloric and nutrient intake by up to 25%, an, an impossibility for many poor women. Breastfeeding, in fact, has relevance to the population issue on several different but interconnected levels. In many countries, infant sorry, okay. In many countries, increases in infant mortality have been linked to the switch from breastfeeding to bottle feeding. Infant formula lacks the antibodies in breast milk that helps to protect babies from disease. Poor women, moreover, often cannot afford a steady supply of formula and dilute it with too much water. Proper sterilization of bottles, nipples, and drinking water is also problematic in poor households. As a result, third world infants breastfed for less than 6 months are 5 times more likely to die in the second 6 month of life those who have been than those who have been breastfed longer. Overall, the mortality rate for bottle fed infants in the third world is roughly double that for breastfeeding infants. Intensive sales campaigns for multinational corporations, such as the Swiss based Nestle Company and the American Home Products, bear a large share of the responsibility for the shift from breast to bottle feeding. Advertisements with pictures of pumps, smiling white babies, and penetration of local health establishments by company representatives have helped convince women that they will have healthier children if they switch to formula. An international campaign against these formula pushers finally led the World Health Organization in 1980 to establish a voluntary code of conduct, setting standards for the advertising and marketing of formula. Every country signed on except for the United States, and they don't even care about food being a right. So America's obviously showing its mask off for quite a long time now. Although the code has brought improvements in terms of mass advertising. The companies still widely promote formula through health establishments. A study of breastfeeding in four third world cities found that formula marketers have close commercial ties with physicians, pharmacists, and midwives, and that as a result, women who use Western type health and maternity services tended to introduce formula earlier. The WHO code is clearly not strong enough. The decline in breastfeeding is also due to the fact that more women are now employed outside the home in the occupations and workplaces that actively discourage the practice or do not offer support. Extended maternity leave with pay, on site daycare, and flexible scheduling would greatly facilitate breastfeeding. But unfortunately, in most countries, these are not high social priorities, despite their obvious benefits to women and children. In addition to giving protection against infection, another key advantage of breastfeeding is that it happens to be the world's most effective natural contraceptive. It frequently causes lactational amenorrhea, the suppression of ovulation and menstruation by the release of hormone prolactin. Each month of breastfeeding adds up to 3 weeks to the interval between births, and women who breastfeed often, whenever the baby wants, delay the return uh, to fertility even longer. Hence, the decline in breastfeeding without corresponding use of effective contraception means that pregnancies are more closely spaced, and the close spacing of births is itself a major cause of infant mortality. The relationship can also go the other way. A child's death means a woman stops breastfeeding and resumes fertility sooner, with a higher risk of the next child's death. This vicious biological circle may be the one key reasons high infant mortality and high fertility go hand in hand. So, assuming you don't have people to help you breastfeed, like other mothers sharing, and like there's some grandmothers who might be 50 or 40. Sorry, I should have said 40. And so they could probably help with that. So this is probably mostly saying situations where you're impoverished and you most likely don't have a circle to help you. The last but not least cause of high birth rates is the subordination of women, male dominance in the family, patriarchal social norms, the systematic exclusion of women from the development process, and the absence of decent birth control services combine to force many women into having more children than they want. See Chapter 3. The social environment, in effect, leaves them little or no reproductive choice. Behind the demographic statistics, then lies a reality unfamiliar to many middle class people who do not have to worry from day to day about who will help in the fields and who will take care of them when they are old and sick, or how many children they need to have in order to ensure that a few survive to adulthood. High birth rates are often a distress signal that people's survival is endangered. Yet the proponents of population control put the argument the other way around, insisting that people are endangering their own survival and the survival of future generations by having so many children. This is the basis of Malthusian philosophy that has defined the dimensions of the population problems for so long. I don't know why this is in a red rectangle, but whatever. The impact of AIDS. It is difficult to predict how many with any certainty the long-term demographic impact of the HIV pandemic, given the non-existence or inaccuracy of data. The U.S. Census Bureau's World Population Profile 1994 makes the number of sobering projections, however. Presently, 14 million people worldwide are believed to be infected with the HIV virus, and this number is likely to rise between 30 to 40 million by the year 2000. AIDS will have a greater effect on death rates than on birth rates, since the long incubation period of HIV means that many women will have completed their childbearing years before contracting full blown AIDS. AIDS could increased crude death rates significantly in a number of worst affected countries. For example, by more than 300% in Zambia and Zimbabwe by the year 2010, mother to children transmissions also augurs considerable increase in infant and child mortality, reserving recent improvements in child survival. The Census Bureau estimates that AIDS will triple child mortality rates in Zambia and Zimbabwe, double them in Kenya and Uganda, and increase them fivefold in Thailand and by the year 2010. AIDS could have the population growth rates of the majority of the worst affected countries. In 2010, the Central African Republic, Congo, Kenya, and Zimbabwe could have growth rates of 1% or less. Thailand, however, is the only country projected to experience negative population growth as a result of AIDS. Although these projections may prove incorrect, they point to the severity of the HIV/AIDS pandemic and call into question the international community's current obsession with controlling birth rates instead of high death rates, particularly in Africa. So, the crude birth rate is the number of births per thousand people in a given year. The crude mortality rate or death rate is the number of deaths per thousand people in a given year. Replacement level fertility is the level of fertility at which women on average are having only enough daughters to replace themselves in a given population. Population growth rate is the rate at which a population is growing or declining in a given year from natural increase and net migration, computed as a percentage of base population. Infant mortality rate is the number of deaths of infants under 1 year of age per thousand live births in a given year. Child mortality rate is the number of deaths of children aged 1 to 4 per thousand children in this age group in a given year. Alright, now I will read this in the next video, guys. I'll be back.